Hi and good afternoon. Welcome. I'm Deb Silverman, president of the Ulster Garden Club, and it is my pleasure to be here. On behalf of the Ulster Garden Club and Friends of Historic Kingston, we are happy to welcome you to help us celebrate today the 200th anniversary of the birth of architect and landscape designer Calvert Vaux. Please, as a reminder, silence your cell phones. At this time, I'd like to introduce Mayor Noble.
Thank you, Deborah. We are so excited to be able to welcome all of you here to Kingston City Hall. We have a really great presentation in store, and I want to just thank the Ulster Garden Club for helping to bring this event here to this beautiful building and to this unique space. So I have an official proclamation that I want to read, but I want to just take a moment to just share some personal stories and thoughts that I have about the celebration that is happening this year on behalf of Mr. Vaux. And so for many of you that may not know that before I was elected mayor, I actually worked for the Kingston Parks and Recreation Department. I actually went to school to study parks management and to really be able to have a sense of what it takes to be able to build amazing parks. And all you had to do was look back in time to really be able to see the change that occurred in the creation of these magnificent parks in our cities. And I think that that's what's been so special about the work that was done in Central Park or in Buffalo or even in our very own Newburgh, just south of here, of being able to create these special places in the heart of communities, not hundreds of miles away where people couldn't get to, places that were accessible, yet beautiful, but really kind of created that safe space. And I feel like that's what we're still trying to do today in Kingston and in our very own way. And I think that a lot of that inspiration came from, the 1800s and the early creation of what we all know as Central Park, but it's also the place where I proposed to my wife at Turtle Pond and the Belvedere Castle. And so for me, Central Park, not only did I study it in college, but to be able to have an opportunity to be here today and to learn more about his life and work is just really special. And so, but I'm going to now officially read a proclamation that I had. So bear with me. Now, some of this history is already in your program, and so if you miss something that I say, you can read it in there, or we'll also hear about it from Sara today. So, whereas today we honor and recognize the life of Calvert Vaux, born in 1824, 200 years ago this year. He was an architect and landscape designer, and whereas he is best known as the co-designer of Central Park in Manhattan, Prospect Park in Brooklyn, but Vaux also had a lasting influence on the Hudson Valley by designing Downing Park, as I spoke of, in Newburgh, as well as numerous estates along the Hudson River. And whereas Vaux was married to Mary McEntee, so I'll tell you another little secret. I also loved the Hudson River School of Painting, and being able to have the connection to Mr. Jervis McEntee is pretty darn special. And I'll keep going, sorry. Who is a Hudson River School of Painter. Vaux is buried here in Kingston at Montrepose Cemetery. And whereas we would like to thank the Ulster Garden Club for organizing this event, as well as Sara Cedar Miller, a photographer and historian emerita of the Central Park Conservancy, for speaking today and sharing her experience and expertise. Learning the history of our community helps broaden our cultural understanding and deepens the appreciation of our city. Now, therefore, I, Stephen T. Noble, Mayor of the City of Kingston, do hereby proclaim Calvert Vaux Day in the City of Kingston and urge all residents to come together to celebrate in unity. So, Deborah, I'm going to give this to you. Thank you again so much for everything, and congratulations. Go back to you.
Try again. Thank you. Thank you so much, Mayor Noble. It's now my pleasure, of course, to welcome Sara Cedar Miller, who is our historian emerita of the Central Park Conservancy. Having worked there for over 40 years, this is Sara's second visit to Kingston to share her extensive knowledge of Calvert Vaux and the role he played in the creation of Central Park as well as many other projects, including those in our area. Sara.
Well, thank you all for coming today. I feel so honored to be invited on this important occasion. And, Historic Kingston is so beautiful. I've come in and out so many times that I really have to spend more time here. The landscape, the homes, the architecture, this building blows me away. So, thank you so much, and thank the Ulster Garden Club and the Friends of Historic Kingston, and the Mayor Noble. Thank you so much for this proclamation. I wish Calvert Vaux could know that he is so celebrated, because most people remember his partner, Frederick Law Olmsted, far more than he is recognized. But today, we will change all that. So Calvert Vaux was born in, technologically I sometimes forget, but he was born in what is a lovely Pudding Lane. I've never gone, but I'm leaving for London next month. And I will go to Pudding Lane to try to find out where Calvert Vaux was born. His father was a physician, so middle class, very middle class, and he went to the Merchant Taylor School, which started in like 1570-something, but he must have studied architecture. He was clearly a beautiful draftsman. We'll see some of the things he painted or drew today. And so he must have had the talent, and at this point they must have had an architecture school. That I don't know, but he did ultimately study architecture. And what I love is that the Museum of the City of New York has his drawing utensils, his tools. Here they are in this little case with Calvert Vaux inscribed in it. I don't know if he got it when he was young or much older, but I love the fact that, he used his tools as a draftsman. So when he got out of school, he was the apprentice or young architect to Lewis Knockles Cottingham in Derbyshire, I guess they would say. And this was built in 1827, and I'm not sure that Calvert Vaux had any part of it, but he was, in his 20s, right out of school, and working with basically neo-Gothic architecture was the style of the day, like this structure here, Nelson Hall in Ashbourne, Derbyshire, if you ever go there. And so anyway, one day, he obviously was a beautiful watercolorist and had, at this young age, an exhibit of watercolor. And Andrew Jackson Downing, I hope all of you are familiar with him. He lived in Newburgh. I like to call him the Martha Stewart of his day. He had a magazine, he wrote books. His books were about style, not quite like Martha, but gardening, and he was a pomologist, which was, fruit trees. And he wanted to design beautiful houses. He was moving past gardening and pomology into architecture and landscape architecture, but he didn't know architecture. He wasn't skilled, and America didn't really have a school of architecture back in the 1850s, and so Downing wanted an architect, and he went to England to look for an architect in 1850, and he came across an exhibit of Calvert Vaux's watercolors, and lo and behold, 3 weeks later, Calvert Vaux moved to America, to Newburgh with Downing, and became an American citizen, just like that. I mean, in England, it's more of a class system, and he loved America's land of opportunity, and so he moved to Newburgh. These are, I'm sorry, I keep forgetting. Here's Downing, and here is his original home. I think part of it is still standing in Newburgh, adapted many times over. But they started designing homes and landscapes and gardens, one from Matthew Vassar. And one of the big projects that he was working with Downing on was to redesign the mall in Washington. This is the L'Enfant plan. That basically is the plan that we have today. But when Millard Fillmore was president in the 1850s, or late 40s, sorry, I forget the dates of Millard Fillmore. Anyway, this style, L'Enfant style, was completely out of fashion. And he asked Andrew Jackson Downing, another New Yorker, to redesign the mall and around the Smithsonian and around Lafayette Park behind the White House, to redesign it all because none of it had really been built. And that straight lines, those straight geometric lines that we have today were out of fashion. And so here is the design that Calvert Vaux, but probably mainly Andrew Jackson Downing, worked on. And they were designing what would have been the first landscape project of Calvert Vaux, except that, well, I'll hold that for a minute, that thought for a minute. He moved to Newburgh. Newburgh and Downing was a very big, the center of artistic Hudson Valley Circle. And here is the photograph of Jervis McEntee, a Hudson River School painter, which needs no introduction in Kingston, and his sister Mary Swan McEntee, who became the wife of Calvert Vaux. So Calvert Vaux spent a lot of time in Kingston, courting Mary, hanging out with Jervis McEntee. Jervis McEntee's paintings are rather somber. He liked to do late fall, winter, beautiful woodland paintings, scenes of people skating on the pond, or I think they're skating. But this is at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Jervis McEntee was the only student of Frederick Church. And so most people don't realize that Frederick Church had a student, but it was Jervis McEntee. The two of them traveled to Europe together. And this is a painting, here's Frederick Church, and you can see this tranquil scene. He was also, Frederick Church, a third cousin of Olmsted. So not only was Vaux related, but Church was related, and Church, very briefly in 1872, became a commissioner of Central Park. And so, the obelisk that's behind the Metropolitan Museum of Art, it's Frederick Church who sited it. So he cited it because it was behind the museum, but also it was on this knoll called Greywacky Knoll. The bridge right near it is called Greywacky because it's Greywacky stone somewhere from Westchester. Anyway, so here is Frederick Church, and he gets to know Calvert Vaux, and because of McEntee, and when it comes time, as you heard, for Frederick Church to build his Olana, he wasn't an architect either, and he needed to know that his building was not going to fall down. And so he hired Calvert Vaux for the structure. Most of the ornamental design was from Church. Here's a picture of Olana. But Calvert Vaux cited a lot of the landscape, and Church was very inspired because he did it in the 1870s, and so much of his landscape was inspired by Central Park. And of course, since this building was partially designed by Calvert Vaux, we like to take credit for that. Anyway, this orientalizing design that Church did, you will see later that Vaux did in Central Park. But in the meantime, Vaux started designing homes, and one of the things he designed was a studio for Jervis McEntee, which kept getting enlarged. Jervis married Gertrude Sawyer. The McEntees and the Vauxes were the were a foursome. They traveled together, they went everywhere together. Jervis McEntee was Calvert Vaux's best friend. And he built the studio for Jervis McEntee, and when he married Gertrude, they enlarged it so that the couple could live there. It got moved. Today, it's across the street from, I think, 99. No, that's a different. Here's the original structure when it got moved. You probably all know better than I do, but this is the original structure, and I took this picture, I think, in recently or last year, but the blank area is kind of where the studio was. Anyway, you can't really see it, and it's now part of someone's home. But Calvert Vaux was building buildings in the Hudson with Andrew Jackson Downing, and then suddenly in 1852, Andrew Jackson Downing drowned in the Hudson River in a steamboat accident. The Henry Clay was drag racing with another steamboat, and the Henry Clay caught fire, and everyone jumped ship. Downing's wife survived, and his mother-in-law, I think, survived, but he didn't survive. He died, and many other people died. And so that was devastating to Calvert Vaux because he didn't like to work alone. He really wanted a partner. He eventually worked with other architects, but Calvert Vaux did not like to work alone. I don't know, he was a little insecure, I guess we would say, and he was short, by the way. I am actually taller than Calvert Vaux, and I just clocked in at 4'11" and a half. And Calvert Vaux was 4'10". So he was quite short, which might have something to do with his insecurity. I'm not a psychologist, I don't know. But at any rate, they never finished the mall in Washington. But what Calvert Vaux did, I mean, he loved Downing. He named his son Downing Vaux after Downing, and then when on the grounds of the Smithsonian, the old Smithsonian, the brick building on the mall, if you go to the Enid Haupt Garden, you will see this urn that was designed by Calvert Vaux in memory of Andrew Jackson Downing. And it's large, it's quite large, and on a big pedestal. So Calvert Vaux's work is actually on the mall in Washington. So what Calvert Vaux did was start a practice, stayed in Kingston, but also, of course, went where the action was in New York City, and this is his business card. He was in the Appleton building on Broadway, and you can see Newburgh on the Hudson, and all kinds of buildings that he designed. So while he was he's a young man, and remember, America doesn't have a whole lot of architects, so he gets some great jobs, one of which is on the left, the house for one of the early commissioners of Central Park, John A.C. Gray. And he then, next to it, builds the Bank of New York, which is, Gray is part of the Bank of New York. And so he builds a house and a bank for Gray, and Gray has just become a new commissioner of Central Park. And so Calvert Vaux, needless to say, is learning all about this. And so these two gentlemen, first on the right is Charles Willis Eliot. Eliot was also a well-to-do gentleman who was very interested in horticulture, and he met Vaux through Downing up in Newburgh. And so we have Eliot. So now Calvert Vaux knows two new commissioners, Eliot, and he knows Gray. While this is happening, Central Park had been taken for the land in 1853 by the state legislature. It only went at that time from 59th Street to 106th Street, 5th to 8th, which is now Central Park West. So they were designing the park, and now we'll talk a little politics. The people who were in charge were the most corrupt mayor New York City has ever had, well, maybe until today, but I mean, this is hot off the press. So, but we did have this very corrupt mayor, and he decided to appoint himself the head of this new park, and appointed through very secret channels Egbert Ville, who is the gentleman next to Willis. He was a West Point trained engineer. He fought in the Mexican War. He became an engineer for the state of New Jersey, but he heard about the park being taken in 1853, and he knew that someday they would need a designer. And so on his own, he started walking the area of Central Park and creating not only a design for the future park, but the topography, which he was a sanitary engineer is what it was called, but a topographical engineer. And he was designing the landscape because there was no designer yet. And it wasn't a great design, to say the least, but he got the job and was hired by the mayor. And then they needed a superintendent. So in walks Frederick Law Olmsted, he's writing editing his book that became The Walks and Talks of an American Farmer in England. Frederick Law Olmsted saw himself more as a writer than anything else, but he had two different farms, one in Connecticut. He's from Hartford, Connecticut. He asked his father, who was a dry goods merchant, to bankroll him. So his father buys him a farm in I forget where, but in Connecticut, and then he's writing he's in an inn, working on his book, editing his book, when Charles Willis Eliot, who we just met, is also there, just enjoying himself at this inn, Seaside Inn, and or not Seaside, yeah, well, Long Island Sound. Anyway, so he tells him, the new park, I'm a commissioner, there's a new park in New York, you've probably heard about it. We don't know if he had, but probably heard about it. And we need a superintendent, and you have to be a Republican. And so, which Olmsted was, as was Fox. And so he took the next boat and started, Olmsted knew everybody because he was a writer and very well-to-do in terms of social clubs and groups in New York, artists, writers, and he had also worked not anonymously, but under the name Yeoman for the New York Times. And so he knew everybody, and he got everybody, including Washington Irving, to write him letters of recommendation. He got the job because of all the people he knew and because he was a Republican. So then he starts clearing the land, and this is what Central Park looked like in 1857, not the park it is today. And so here's Calvert Vaux, who has the awareness that Egbert Ville has a bad plan for the park. He once had met Frederick Law Olmsted at Downing's house in Newburgh, very briefly, but he understood that now that Olmsted was the superintendent, he was going to understand the topography of the land better than anybody else. And the other thing Calvert Vaux wanted to do was get rid of Ville. And so he wanted a design competition, but Ville already had the job. And so he had his two commissioners. He talked to Willis Eliot, and he talked to John Gray, and lo and behold, Calvert Vaux was allowed to talk to the commissioners. This was unheard of. And he gave a talk about how they needed to have a design competition, and they did. And so in October of '57, they advertised there's a design competition. The winner is going to get $2,000, and the next runner-up would be $1,000, and then $500, and there were 4 prizes and $250. And so Calvert Vaux, who I mentioned did not like to work alone, invited Frederick Law Olmsted to partner with him and walk. He knew that he would be the best partner. They had the similar backgrounds. They were both from Republicans. I guess that was important. And Olmsted knew the landscape. He was a farmer. By this time, he gave up his farm in Connecticut and told his father he wanted a farm in Staten Island, and so he was living in Staten Island, and but knew all about drainage and all kinds of things you needed to do. So Olmsted was quite knowledgeable, as was Vaux, about buildings, but even beginning with Downing doing landscapes, he was learning about landscapes. And so we just assumed that they got together, but here's the backstory. Calvert Vaux goes to Olmsted and says, now there's going to be a design competition. Will you partner with me? And Frederick Law Olmsted says no. And this is the story no one knows. And so Olmsted worked for Ville. And he knew that Ville, who already had his design accepted by New York City, would resubmit his design in the design competition. And Olmsted really needed a job. At this point in life, his brother had died. He was going to marry his brother's widow, which he did. Mary Olmsted became Mary Olmsted. And he adopted his brother's children, and then they had children of their own. But he wasn't getting a lot of money writing. He was in the publishing business and working with Putnam, which is a big publishing house, but they went under. And his father was bankrolling him for all of this stuff. I always like to call Olmsted kind of a spoiled brat. And so he needed the money for the superintendent job. And so he didn't want to ruffle Ville's feathers at all. But we know from Prospect Park that Vaux was really, no matter how short he was tough with Olmsted and very persistent. And finally, he got Olmsted to go to Ville and say, is it okay if I enter the design competition? And Ville's like, yeah, who cares, whatever. And so the two of them spend the winter of 57-58, enter their design last, in fact, after midnight, and one of the park commissioners wanted to cancel their plan because they entered it after the deadline, but we don't know, but enough people said, oh, let them do that, and needless to say, they won. And they had the best design. And this goes from 59th only to 106. They bought the last 4 blocks from 106 to 110 only in 1863, when most of the park was already created. And they had a wonderful presentation. And one of this painting is by Jervis McEntee, who helped them in their design competition. It's a really small painting, and it would be basically where, if you know the park, you're at Bethesda Terrace looking across at the lake to the Ramble. And way in the distance of the painting is the fire tower on top of the reservoir. That's now Belvedere Castle. So we can even locate this painting. And so also helping Olmsted and Vaux in their design competition was Jacob Raymold. Jacob Raymold was also a British architect who came over to America in 1852. He knew Vaux. Together with Vaux, they actually established the AIA, the American Institute of Architects, which is, of course, the major architectural organization in America today. But you had to have a design of a garden in your competition, and Jacob Ray Moll did this beautiful design for Olmsted and Vaux. They asked him to partner with them, and he said, oh no, and you're never going to win, and Ville's going to win, and the politics of it all. So at this moment in time, Jacob Ray Moll did not enter the competition, otherwise it would have basically been the three of them. These beautiful scenes were probably painted by Calvert Vaux. They're not signed, but they were scenes to show what the park would look like. And here's another one, and they're beautiful scenes. And in fact, let me go back. So this is the Great Hill way up on 106th Street. It doesn't have that tower, but it is exactly the way the landscape goes down into the loch, which is a body of water. And this looks exactly like this today, including that little building. Not the same building, but a building sticking out in a peninsula across from the Ramble, and then you can see the fire tower that's now Belvedere Castle. So the great innovation of their design was the transverse roads. Now, I'm sure all of you have been in New York, and you've either ridden in a car or a taxi or a bus underneath the park. And the whole beauty of it, and here is a picture I took from a helicopter, and it is, you can see that truck, or that white truck, had just come out of the tunnel, and on top of it is the East Drive of the park and the pieces of the meadow. So I like to say, for better or worse, that Olmsted and Vaux invented the modern highway system because, in fact, these transverse roads, 65th, 79th, 86, and 96, are the first over and underpasses in America. And, you know, now we have much bigger over and underpasses. But what that did was make the park take all the street traffic away from the park. And when you were in the park, the whole idea was that it become a refuge and that you forget that you are in New York City. There were no tall buildings. The tallest buildings went to the fifth floor. And in fact, 1857, just as they're beginning the park, Otis invented the elevator. So, of course, that meant buildings would be higher than the tree line in Central Park, but they didn't know that then. They wound up late in life understanding it. In fact, Frederick Law Olmsted Jr. said that the skyline of New York ruined his father's masterpiece. I like to think of it as the beautiful frame around the beautiful picture. But at any rate, I think it was Calvert Vaux, and we do have some proof from Andrew Haswell Green, who was interviewed, and that interview is written down in the New York Historical Society, who says, yes, Calvert Vaux invented the transverse roads. And that makes perfect sense because that is how architects think, and especially Calvert Vaux, who in 1857 was trying to get people in New York to build apartment buildings. They were called French flats. This is Paris with mansard roofs. It probably looks familiar because Paris looks like this everywhere. And Vaux knew the buildings in Paris. And Americans did not want to ever live in buildings with other people. They said it was like living on shelves. And so, you know, here was Calvert Vaux. He said, Manhattan is so small, and they're all more and more people are coming, and you've got to make taller buildings. You've got to make buildings where people live together because, you know, you've got to layer everything because this is such a small island. And that's how an architect thinks, and that's how Calvert Vaux thought. And we have proof from Andrew Haswell Green that Calvert Vaux is the one that invented the transverse roads. And then they brought the transverse roads inside the park, which is why we have all those bridges and arches in the park. But the original Greenswood plan had one bridge in it. All those bridges that we think of as the hallmark and the trademark of Central Park, they aren't in the original plan at all. That's a very long story why. But anyway, so we have people building the park. There's very few photographs of their actual building, but there is a lithograph. They're building the mall. There were 3,500, mostly Irish, some Germans building the park. They were the laborers and the immigrants of the day, and they were doing the hard labor of building the park. And very little technology, pickaxes, shovels. They had steam derricks, and they didn't even have dynamite. They had to blast all those rocks that were blasted with gunpowder. So it was very dangerous. 4 people lost their lives building the park. While they were building it, there was originally up at the north end of the park a convent for 200 Catholic schoolgirls and nuns, the Sisters of Charity of Mount St. Vincent. And so they left to move to Yonkers, where they are today on the Yonkers-Bronx border, the College of Mount St. Vincent. But they had these headquarters, and so the Olmsteads and the Vauxes moved in while they were building the park. And there's a wonderful letter from Olmsted talking about how his children love to run up and down in the greenhouse. So the park, the area, it's now the park's composting area. You can't see that building, although one of the abutment walls does still exist. But anyway, they designed Central Park to be a work of art, so I like to put the frame around it. And the way that they designed Central Park is similar to the way you go to a museum to look at beautiful scenes. And so you look at a beautiful scene, you take a few steps, you look at another beautiful scene. Maybe it's a meadow scene and you take a few steps and it's a beautiful scene of a river. And then you take a few steps and it's a detail of rocks and moss and, vines growing over it, kind of a still life. That is what they wanted you to experience while walking through Central Park. So they designed 3 different types of landscapes with 3 different ways to get around the park, the circulation system, and it all wove together like a beautiful tapestry. And so for the formal landscapes, the ones that are man-made, clearly man-made, like the mall, trees do not, by Mother Nature, grow in a straight line. And so this was the avenue that would be formal avenue. People got dressed up to go to the park. They wore formal clothing. It was a big deal to go to the park. It was also expensive because everyone lived below 14th Street. And here's the park only beginning at 59th Street. Poor people had to walk to get to the park. So here is the mall today, of course. It is the most important horticultural feature in Central Park. This is the 3rd planting of elms. They are 104 years old. I mean, they were planted 104 years ago. They weren't planted from seed. So they planted these elms, but the first few died because they planted them too big, and then their roots hit the rock and the clay underneath, and so they cut them down, and in 1922, the elms we have today are the elms that are still there. So we have the formal landscape, and then we have the pastoral landscape, pastoral like pasture. And so there's sheep meadow, and of course, the park didn't originally have sheep, but people gave the park presents, and so people from England gave them a flock of sheep, and so then they put them on the meadow, and actually, here's a picture of the meadow today. It's way too long a story, but I had the honor and pleasure of meeting the descendants of the only 2 shepherds of Central Park. And they didn't know each other existed. And so we had lunch at Tavern on the Green, which is the sheepfold. It's where the sheep were kept. And Tom, who is no longer with us, was born upstairs in Tavern on the Green. And so someday I'll tell that story, but it's really fun and long. Anyway, so also with the pastoral landscape are the big water bodies. So the whole idea was that there were these cramped and crowded quarters in the park, and they wanted everyone to get a sense of space. So that's why they had the big meadows and the big lakes. And of course, they said right away you had to have a place for skating. And so ice skating, every other city, rivers froze over, but the Hudson River was so big it never froze over, and New Yorkers couldn't skate, and they, were jealous of all the cities where people could skate, and so that's it. And so here is the lake today, and last are the picturesque or the woodlands. So they wanted to balance, first of all, the formal landscapes with the pastoral landscapes and with the picturesque landscapes. Up at the north end of the park, there are these man-made waterfalls. What you're looking at is a concrete wall covered with artfully placed boulders and New York City drinking water flowing over it. But they wanted you to feel like after a day's work, you could go and take a walk to the Adirondacks, and that's just what they did. And if you've never been to the northern part of the park, it's the best part. And so then Calvert Vaux went to work doing all the buildings in the park. And their philosophy, this is a quote from Calvert Vaux, nature first, second, and third. In other words, no architecture when you first come in the park. They wanted you to cross that wall and be hit with nature immediately. And so nature first, second, and third, architecture after a while. And here, this is a quote from an architect. So he and Olmsted understood that it was nature that is what New Yorkers craved, what they needed. And so they waited until you got to basically 72nd Street to create Bethesda Terrace. Calvert Vaux created the program, and Jacob Ray Mould created the designs. And so part of the four balustrades that come down from the 72nd Street down to the lake and the fountain, let me just go back so you can see. Does this have a pointer? Anyway, you see the fountain, and you can see that there are two staircases, four balustrades, and each one is dedicated to the seasons. So this is spring, where the baby birds are being born in the nest, and the busy bees of summer, and then the hunted deer in the fall, and then there are the baby birds all grown up and on bare tree branches. Underneath, they created an arcade. Those are Minton tiles on the ceiling. The Minton Tile Company is still in business because for the last 50 years, the city salted the roads. The tile used to be backed with iron, and they are screwed. Each tile of 15,000 plus tiles are screwed into the ceiling so a tile doesn't fall on your head, but they all got rusted from the salting. So when I came to the park in 1984, they were putting them in crates, and it was only in 2004 that we got a wonderful gift to be able to restore the Minton tiles. When you go to the Washington, to the Senate or the House, or it's all Minton tile on the floor. This is the only instance, thanks to Jacob Ray Mould, maybe Calvert Vaux too, that has a Minton tile on the ceiling. And we had to replace many of them, and that because the Minton tile are still in business in England, in Stoke-on-Trent, England, we were able to do the whole restoration project. So it's beautiful. So you don't just go up at the mall and go around the steps, go down the steps, and then look up and you will see these incredible tiles that were designed by Jacob Ray Mould. And so this is Bethesda Terrace with the fountain looking from the Ramble straight ahead. And you're gonna see it, you've seen it on the news every night, but you don't know it. That Calvert Vaux's inspiration is the inspiration for the U.S. Capitol, and here's why. So here's the Capitol before Frederick Law Olmsted in the 1870s is asked to do the landscape. It's sitting on the ground. This is the east side, the one that faces Library of Congress, but it doesn't have a terrace. And so Frederick Law Olmsted is invited to do the grounds of the Capitol in Washington, and he puts a terrace on all around it. And as you can see, there's the balustrade, and here is the picture of the terrace and the 2 balustrades and the 7 arches, and it's like, Bethesda Terrace, designed by his partner, Calvert Vaux. He just takes the terrace and sticks it onto the Capitol. And here's another view, as you can see. And it's that Frederick Law Olmsted would never have thought of it if Calvert Vaux had not designed Bethesda Terrace. So the man deserves a lot of credit, even when his name isn't mentioned. And so Calvert Vaux went on to design lovely buildings that no longer exist in the park, like this one, which is Mineral Springs. It's now a brick sort of Le Pan Quotidian right off Sheep Meadow, but it was Mineral Springs where you could go and get a glass of mineral water because temperance was a big thing and there was no alcohol in the park. And so it had silver faucets, and you wouldn't just get a glass of, say, Saratoga water. You would say you want Saratoga water, and they would mix the chemicals of the water and hand it to you. The New York Historical Society has the cookbook for all the Mineral Springs recipes for all the waters around the world. And so Calvert Vaux did design the dairy, which is now a visitor center. And here it's just been restored by the Central Park Conservancy. And originally, on top of where there was a fire tower, Calvert Vaux would design Belvedere Castle, Belvedere meaning beautiful view in Italian. I don't know how much of a beautiful view it had then because it overlooked 2 reservoirs that were in the park. But either way, there was a main castle and a whole other second castle. Today, that second castle doesn't exist, but when we restored it only a few years ago, we put up this little tower in that pavilion. You can see a colorful tower. Calvert Vaux designed that. So we hadn't originally put it back in 1983, but 2 or 3 years ago when we restored the castle, we put back Calvert Vaux's little tower. You can't climb it. You can climb to the big tower, though. And this is just a beautiful design by Calvert Vaux of Huddlestone Arch. So the bridges were designed by either just Calvert Vaux alone or later Vaux and Mold. But this is Calvert Vaux, and it's the most interesting, unusual bridge in the park. It's called Huddlestone Arch. Bridges go over water, arches go over land. And it is held together by absolutely no mortar. That's all friction, all science, I like to say. So it's the keystone and the whole Roman keystone thing. When you walk under there, that has been standing since 1866. No need to worry. But you can see that there's a design where you see on the bottom of his drawing that there's a big stone. That stone had to be hauled in with a house-moving machine. I mean, Calvert Vaux nothing was too small for these guys. It was like the major public works project that the country had ever seen. And here it is today, and it's up in the North End. And right now we are doing the Harlem Mere Center, and after you would come out of this, you would be hit with the back of a skating rink. And it was like you went through this amazing walk from Central Park West, about 103rd Street, all the way to the east side. And then, like, your heart would drop. It would be so disappointing. And today we are creating the continuation of that walk so that there will be a skating rink and a swimming pool, but the trees and the water will continue until it opens out to the Harlem Mere. And so Calvert Vaux designed the bridges in all different media. So this is Bow Bridge, named so because it resembles the bow of an archer. It used to have these beautiful urns, and then sometime around 1900, the urns disappeared. So I knew the bridge as having these little triangular things on top. And I thought, the bridge is beautiful, who needs the urns? Well, one day, Tom Giordano, I like to give him credit, was a historic preservationist who worked for the Conservancy, and he liked to ride his motorcycle to work from the Bronx. And so he's on Riverside Drive, and there's a lot of traffic, and he looks over at 155th Street, and he goes, "That's our urn. That's the urn from Bow Bridge." You know, he had seen enough historic photographs to know that that was the urn. And so he took this picture that you see on the left, and he came back. We went, yep, that's it. So in the middle of the night, we came back, and we took back our urn. And now we had the exact measurements, and they are planted 4 seasons a year. I particularly use one in the snow, so you can see we don't leave them alone in the winter either. And then, of course, Calvert Vaux designed this beautiful bridge number 28. It's being painted right now because it's needed a paint job for many years. But it is Art Nouveau, 40 years before Art Nouveau. I mean, here's Art Nouveau. And you can see that Calvert Vaux invented that whole beautiful, graceful Gothic arches long before the Parisians ever did. And then rustic they deserve all this credit. I'm not making it up. And so rustic architecture, that came from China, and then it moved into Europe. So that's what these 2 pictures are. And this is a sketch by Calvert Vaux of a rustic architecture little scene on the Hudson River. You see the river, you see the rustic architecture. Calvert Vaux was a beautiful drawer. And I took this picture from Mohonk Mountain House because it's, of course, looks just like Mohonk Mountain House, but Mohonk Mountain House is later than Central Park. And so we came first. And then, when it was time for the Central Park Conservancy to restore the rustic shelter, all the rustic work in the park, the Mohonk Mountain House craftsmen taught our craftsmen how to do it. So we have a relationship with Mohonk. And the first possible piece of rustic architecture around here is this black and white photograph of a seat at Downing's estate. And I'm thinking that Calvert Vaux is the one who brought the rustic architecture to Andrew Jackson Downing and had this made. And of course, throughout the park, we have rustic architecture. There were over 100 structures, and now we've rebuilt or created more fences, benches. Here, Calvert Vaux designed this little mushroom or umbrella one right over Bow Bridge, and now you look up, and here it is. We just redesigned it this year. The Kinderberg, right near the dairy, was the largest rustic structure. We have just redone it. We have a whole rustic crew that only creates or maintains the rustic stuff. Then now we're leaving Central Park. Calvert Vaux designed really wild stuff for Prospect Park. Of course, there too. Where is Frederick Law Olmsted? He's in California. He left. He went to California. He was working in a mine, the Mariposa mine there. And the people in Brooklyn go to Calvert Vaux and say, "We would like you to design Prospect Park. No politics." That's what Olmsted hated. He hated the politics. And Calvert Vaux says, well, I have to work with Frederick Law Olmsted. So he writes him a whole series of letters. We know all of the letters back and forth from Olmsted to Vaux about Brooklyn. Meanwhile, Central Park is only half built by this time, but Olmsted left during the Civil War. And Vaux begs him to come back and insults him and yells at him and does everything in his power. And it says they're going to give us a lot of money and there'll be no politics. They'll let us be the artists that we feel we are. And so finally, in November 1865, Frederick Law Olmsted comes back to New York, finishes Central Park with Vaux, and they build Prospect Park in Brooklyn. And then they build, these are all Vaux structures in Delaware Park, really wild stuff, very Victorian, very imaginative. Olmsted and Vaux invent the Parkway. Eastern Parkway was separating, coming out of Prospect Park and going into Brooklyn. That is on the corner is their first drawing of Eastern Parkway. No one had created a parkway with trees and promenades, but they did that. And then this is Calvert Vaux. So Olmsted goes off on his own, and they split up in 1872. It was Olmsted, Vaux and Company. Then it becomes Olmsted and Sons. Vaux goes back to his architecture business. He's building homes in the Hudson Valley. He's building buildings everywhere. But he does not ever quit being a landscape architect for the New York City Department of Parks. And when I came in 1984, I can't tell you what it is now, but in 1984, Calvert Vaux had designed more parks in New York City than any other person. And this is Columbus Park, which is in Chinatown, right behind the court system, and I forget what is, loggia is designed by Calvert Vaux. Calvert Vaux and Jacob Raymond go on to design the first building of the Museum of Natural History and the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And here is one of the facades. When you go to the Lehman Wing at the Met and look backwards, that is the design that Calvert Vaux and Jacob Raymond did. They go on to do the Calvert Vaux and Frederick Withers. He became a partner of Vaux because, remember, he doesn't like to work alone. And so they designed this beautiful Jefferson Courthouse, which is now a library, public library. And of course, there were many designs by Calvert Vaux in Kingston and elsewhere that no longer exist. The very sad news is that Calvert Vaux drowned in the Hudson River, right off sort of Yonkers. No, in Brooklyn, at Gravesend Bay. His wife had died. It was said to be very depressed. It was foggy. It was in November. He didn't have his spectacles. He may have fallen off a pier. We don't know. November 19th, 1895. But his body was found in Gravesend Bay. They did not tell Olmsted. Olmsted at that point was in a mental institution in Brookline. He probably had dementia. He was in McLean, which is actually a famous psychiatric hospital, the grounds of which Olmsted designed. And so Olmsted died in 1903. And as you all know, Calvert Vaux is buried here at Montrepose Cemetery and with the McEntees. And I had the pleasure last time I was here of actually finally finding it. I had tried once before, but I couldn't find it. Now I found it. And so you have Vaux here forever. And I just want to point out my book, Before Central Park, which is what I forget why I wanted. Oh, because the whole story of Olmsted and Vaux and the designing the park and their relationship and the relationship to the commissioners and all the fighting that went on is in the book. So if you want to, the end of the part 3 of the book is all about building the park. And then I want to point out Country, Park, and City, The Architecture and Life of Calvert Vaux by Franz Frankowski, my good friend. This is the book on Calvert Vaux. But Frank is writing another book, and it will be coming out in a year or two on Calvert Vaux and the art of Calvert Vaux. So that's the end for me. If you have questions, I'm happy to take them. Okay, no questions? Then I will sit down.
Okay, wow. And thank you very much, Sara, for sharing your depth of insights and information about Calvert Vaux. Awesome pictures. If anyone is interested in visiting the final resting place of Calvert Vaux, the Ulster Garden Club has printed a map, and they're over by there at the door. for Montrepose Cemetery. It's only 1 mile from here. They're available at that exit. And at this point, I'm thanking everyone for coming. Have a great day.